It's really wonderful to be here tonight with everybody. I appreciate on a Thursday evening, on a chilly fall evening, that folks are here with us. And I really appreciate our students for being here, both as participants and as facilitators. We have folks from both sides. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. Just to give folks an overview of what will be happening tonight is I'm going to go over some information about restorative practices, what it looks like here in Burlington School District, but then the bulk of the evening is going to be spent with our student facilitators who have prepared to run virtual circles with our participants here. So we are so thankful for them to be here running those circles. Really appreciate that time. So thank you all for being here, and looking forward to talking to you about restorative practices. Just give me one moment and I'll start screen sharing. And Autumn, can you just give me a vocal confirmation that you can see this?
Yep, it looks good, Mika.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Welcome to everybody. This is an introduction to restorative practices. Just as you're getting settled in, I just invite you, since we are in this virtual space together, if you have any tabs open that might distract you, if you're able to silence your phone just so we can really be engaged tonight. If you're willing and want to turn on your camera, we always love to see folks. So if you can arrange your camera so you can do so. And then there is the option for closed captioning. So please feel free, if you would like to turn on closed captioning, you do that on your end by pressing the CC button on Google Meet, and that will provide you with closed captioning. So thank you, and we're really, really happy to have you here. First and foremost, I want to shout out to our student facilitators tonight. Our students will be facilitating circles tonight, and our students join us from our Summer Racial Justice Academy. So briefly, students, if you could just unmute yourself and just say hello, shout yourself out. We'd love to hear from you.
Hi. Hi, my name is Bisharo.
All right, did we hear from everybody?
Hi, I'm Victoria.
Hi, I'm Alex.
Hi, I'm Mayan.
All right, I think that's everybody. I think that's our facilitators for tonight. So some of you will be in circle with our student facilitators, and they're excited and eager to run our virtual circles with you tonight. So thank you so much to those students for preparing and being willing to do that with our group. So I'm going to be discussing a little bit around restorative practices. As Autumn mentioned, I am the restorative practice coordinator here in the Burlington School District. And I have the joy and honor of getting to work with our educators and students every day, thinking about how to become a deeper restorative community here in Burlington. So one of the goals for restorative practices and purposes for restorative practices in Burlington is to really both proactively build strong relationships with students and families in our community, to really have a foundation of trust and strong bonds between all of the stakeholders in a school. And then also using those relationships for, if harm occurs, to make sure that everyone will have their needs and experiences recognized and acted upon, to create a supportive climate of empowerment for everybody. So that's one of our purposes here in Burlington School District, is to make a strong community that's a joyful learning environment for students to be in, where they want to be here, want to be learning, and know that they can trust in having a safe and supportive school. So just some background around where restorative approaches come from. These practices are rooted in Indigenous cultures throughout the world. And in practice, the restorative circles that we'll be talking about and that you'll have an opportunity to experience tonight really reflect talking circles practiced by the Plains people of North America. So I want to make sure that we recognize where we draw these from. And restorative justice has been something that's been utilized in the community-based setting for a long time. And restorative practices are about now being utilized more and more in schools. And these practices really offer, in a school-based setting, intentional opportunities for folks to build relationships, to foster trust, and then if harm occurs, to be able to respond to that. And so what it means is that when folks are in a building together, sometimes it's just presumed by being in the same physical space, that those relationships will happen. But what restorative practices does is take it one step further to really make sure that there are these intentional ways that folks can build relationships and deepen trust and understanding of each other. So proactively, the aim of restorative practices in schools is to improve school climate and culture. And that's what we want to have the bulk of the experience for students in our Burlington School District to be experiencing, this proactive approach of circles where they're getting to know each other and deepen their understanding of their peers and their teachers and their educators in their building. And then it's also to, if exclusionary or punitive discipline would have needed to been used based on a harmful situation, restorative practices aims to reduce the use of that exclusionary discipline, because we know that these discipline policies disproportionately impact students from historically and marginalized and currently marginalized backgrounds. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. So the foundation of restorative practices, it's a belief that what we know is that if we just focus on reducing suspensions and expulsions, we won't actually address the systemic and structural inequalities that are impacting students' social, emotional, and academic well-being. So again, that's why we take that proactive approach, the bulk of restorative practices aiming to build those relationships and foster trust to address some of those systemic and structural inequalities. So following, there was the Gun-Free Schools Act in 1994, and what's called, you may have heard, a zero tolerance approach to student behavior. That was when suspensions and expulsions really skyrocketed. We saw them go upwards to 40% increased following this act, when defiance became a suspendable offense. But this resulted in horrifying disparities that caused, and so as schools saw these disparities and how students were being affected by these punitive discipline policies, they began to shift and think about how can we respond to behavior in a way that keeps students' dignity and humanity and addresses and holds folks accountable. And that's when they started to look towards restorative practices. And so some important understanding foundations of restorative practices is that it does not ignore harmful behavior, but rather it shifts the focus to honoring and preserving the dignity of people through using these intentional relational practices. Quite often this looks like circle practice to either, again, build relationships or respond to a harmful incident. So again, it focuses not only on the individual or the individuals who have been involved in a situation, but also just your relation and role in a community in upholding that community's well-being and responsibility. It's really an art and a science, and often I touch right here because I see it as a compass guiding you through the way that you interact and are in the world. So yes, you might be able to go into a classroom and see when restorative practices happens in a circle with students, but it also should be the ethos that guides how we are in our interactions and the way that we treat one another together in a community. So why is restorative practices necessary? So I briefly touched on this. We had the Gun-Free Schools, Safe Schools Act in 1994, which resulted in much stronger use of punitive discipline. But we know that this punitive discipline, suspensions and expulsions, actually don't improve students' behavior. They instead have damaging long-term effects on students' behavior and learning. So it has the opposite effect. If students are having situations that cause them to be suspended or expelled, we want to provide them, instead of just kicking them out of school, we want to provide them with opportunities to learn and grow from that behavior and not have it repeat itself. One of the things we know about a school is that if the higher the rate of suspension and expulsion, the lower the rate of their academic achievement for their students. So again, if the goal of schools is to have students learn and grow in their academic achievement and their social emotional well-being, that we need to provide the framework for that to take place. And that's where restorative practices can come in. Because students who are suspended even once are twice as likely to drop out. Then young people who drop out of high school are 8 times more likely to be incarcerated as compared to those who graduate. And we know that students of the global majority and students with disabilities are the individuals who are being disproportionately targeted by these punitive discipline policies and are much more likely to be suspended or expelled, leading to higher rates of potentially dropping out or interacting with the incarceration. So with knowing all of this, how could we not look to a framework like restorative practices? Now I want to pause. I'm not able to see the chat. Autumn, are there any questions coming up in the chat that I should address?
Nope, nobody's chatting.
Okay, just checking. If that happens, feel free to break me. I could talk about restorative practices all day long, as Autumn knows, so thank you so much.
Gotcha.
So there is a link between restorative practices and school safety. So it's really important to understand that when we think about wanting to have safe schools, that's an underpinning. Students can't learn if they don't feel safe. And there was a threat assessment in schools in 2004 in a report that came out that linked safe school climate with reduced threats to safety. So this report recommended the ways to increase a safe school climate are to emphasize listening, to include all members of a school community in planning and creating a culture of respect, and developing trusting relationships between each student and at least one adult. By doing all of these things, our schools would be safer, there'll be reduced threats to safety. RP can do all of these things. It can help create safer and more connected schools, again, through these intentional opportunities at fostering relationships, and then to be able to address harm if harm occurs. So what are restorative practices? This is a visual that credited to Oakland Unified School District. And I really like it because it shows how here, the bulk of it, like I said, should be these community building opportunities. 100% of a student population should have an opportunity to participate in these community building opportunities. This could look like circles during class in our elementary settings. Often this happens during morning meeting. In our secondary settings, this can take place during advisories. And it's these structured restorative circles that you'll have a chance to experience tonight, where you have an opportunity to get to know each other beyond just being in the same space together. Then we know that some students in some situations may call for a more intentional targeted approach if harm occurs. So we had about 15% of our student population, our school population, could participate in these restorative processes to be able to repair harm if it occurs, while still having opportunities at community building and fostering trust. Because there's nothing to repair here at Tier 2, there's no use of a restorative process if you don't have a strong foundation, because there is nothing to repair or no relationship to fix. And finally, some situations call for really targeted intervention, this Tier 3. About 5% of the student population would work with this supported reentry. So again, some of the visual, when you think about what is this ethos, what does this mean? It means you're building healthy relationships between educators and students to reduce, prevent, and improve harmful behavior, noting that if that harm occurs, you do not ignore it, but instead you hold folks accountable and restore the positive relationships that then addresses the needs of a school community. And through those community building opportunities, you're able to discuss and identify needs proactively to hopefully prevent any behavior from occurring in the future. You can see how it's all very interconnected. So this again is from Oakland Unified School District, and it just might help give folks an understanding of, and this isn't, this is generalized, but to look at it, what would be a traditional zero tolerance system, and then a restorative practices educational system. So you have a student here, Carlos, who has a heated argument with his parents before leaving for school, and he's running late. And you can see in a zero tolerance system, what might happen is Carlos arrives at school, he could be greeted by metal detectors and a police search. And then he's late to first period. His teacher scolds him in front of the entire class. He talks back and is given a detention. His day continues to be challenging, and he gets into a minor altercation in the cafeteria. And he's actually detained and arrested by both students involved are arrested. And he's held at a detention facility missing school, and he has a arrest record and could be facing suspension. Again, this is a generalized look at a zero tolerance system, but let's look at how a restorative system might operate slightly differently. Same situation, Carlos has an argument with his parents before leaving for school. He gets to school, and his teachers and administrators welcome him and his fellow students as they're entering. But he's late to first period again, but his teacher waits until after class to talk to Carlos to learn more. And the teacher learns about the argument that happened, so he sets up a meeting with the school counselor to support Carlos. Carlos gets into the minor altercation in the cafeteria, but student peer mediators and support staff intervene, help the students sit down to de-escalate the situation. And then Carlos and the other student actually end up helping clean up the cafeteria during a free period. And then Carlos is able to meet with his counselor and parents after school to help address the conflict at home that was part of why he had a troubling day. So you can see the two different paths that this offers. And again, these are two kind of generalizations of the approaches, but you can see the different outcomes that it does lead to. And we in our district, we are committed to dismantling white supremacy culture. And I want to highlight that restorative practices is one of those tools that can be used to dismantle white supremacy culture. It's not the only tool, but it is one tool. And the way that three of the ways that can be done is through when a community, particularly for those who identify as white, doing this work. So white restorative justice practitioners, they can create and maintain a community value that restorative justice practitioners should be engaged in their own work around understanding intersectional systems of oppression and racial bias. So really unpacking your own implicit bias in your own work in racial equity before engaging in this restorative justice practice and work. And also to create restorative spaces in which those who identify as white can examine whiteness and unlearn racism. So really offering those affinity spaces. And then finally, as an organization, committing to work through our own racial conflicts, both that may happen on a staff-to-staff level and organizationally. And if folks are interested in learning more about this, I really encourage you to look at A Call to White Practitioners written by Dashman and a group of authors I'd be happy to share. Offers some really important tools and considerations when it comes to folks doing restorative justice and restorative practices work, particularly for those who identify as white. So in a school community, you may notice some of these things when it feels like and when it looks like to be a restorative space. So every person's perspectives are unique and equally valued. To be ready to kind of engage in restorative work, we need to be regulated and connected. So we always try to integrate some mindfulness and a recognition that thoughts influence your emotions and your emotions therefore influence your actions. So the space that you're in matters in terms of your mind, body, and spirit. And that you have empathy and consideration for others. And then with that, it encourages conversation to happen. This can be challenging sometimes in a school space for folks, but you have to identify needs before identifying strategies. So can't jump just to solution finding. And the underpinning element to all this is that dialogue. Conversation builds trust and promotes empowerment. Particularly, we want to be promoting empowerment of our students, and we want students to be at the forefront of these practices, ideally like tonight where they're leading them. And so we're going to be moving into Circle shortly. You're going to get to experience some of these essential elements of a circle. So in our schools, when you think about restorative circles that your students or you may be experiencing, these might be parts that would happen. There usually begins with a mindfulness moment to center yourself, to be engaged and ready for the circle. There may be an opening ceremony or quote of some sort that kind of sets the tone for the circle. When the circles are taking place in person, there's the use of a centerpiece and a talking piece to regulate how the conversation goes. You often will identify or remind what the values of the group are, particularly in a classroom. Those are shared and identified before as one of the first circles. The use of guiding questions, that's kind of the bulk of the circle. And then finally, a closing ceremony or quote that ends the circle and provides an opportunity for folks to express thanks for the space that they were in at that time. So with that, we're going to have the opportunity now to actually experience some circles. So we have student facilitators who we are very grateful are willing to facilitate virtual circles. They look a little bit different than in person, but after our COVID time of pandemic teaching, we've been able to kind of hone the skill of virtual circles, and we're really thankful to be getting to do them in person again this year with the students in the school district. But we also know that we're thankful here tonight to be able to do these virtually with everyone who's on this call. So Autumn is going to be putting folks into breakout rooms. Autumn, I'm going to go ahead and stop screen sharing and we can transition.
All right, enjoy.